Tiffany.
And I'm Rihanna, and welcome back to Fresh Off the Broke.
Fresh Off the Broke is about personal experiences growing up Asian American in a predominantly white community, Asian media, and Asian pop culture in general. Race has always been a sensitive topic. Every day there are debates over race. With our podcast, we intend to shed light on the experiences of first-generation Asian immigrants, not put them on a pedestal.
We understand that race isn't everything, but there should be an acknowledgement of people of color, the knowledge gap, and the racial divide that will ideally be broken. Now that that's out of the way, let's get into the episode. Today we'll be discussing Asian mental health. And today we actually have a guest this episode. So Lola, would you like to introduce yourself?
Sure. My name is Lola Wang, and I'm the owner and also a therapist at Fig Tree Counselling. Our practice centers around people of color and queer communities, first and second generation immigrants. And me personally work with a lot of Asian and first gen, second gen clients. And that is also part of our values. We would like to decolonize mental health and be able to provide equal access to all marginalized groups.
Awesome, thank you. So before we get into the episode, we do have a disclaimer given that mental health is a very touchy / serious topic. So the topics and advice that we discuss or share are not a one-size-fits-all for everyone, and we advise listeners / viewers to seek professional help specific to their situation and needs.
The first topic that we're going to be talking about today is COVID and how that's currently affecting the Asian community. Tiffany, would you like to start off?
Yeah, sure. Okay, so one thing I would definitely say, if we're talking about like before versus after COVID, is that my senses, or like my subconscious senses, I feel like they're much more heightened. For example, in the past, obviously, when I go to school, walking down the street, whatever, given that I identify as female, I already don't feel very safe out on the street. However, now with COVID, even though I have transferred to full virtual learning, before when we were still doing in person, I would plan my route to school in such a specific way that to myself, I felt that I could avoid any possible racist interactions, any possible physical violence, attacks, anything pertaining to that type of situation. And even though I had these very specific plans, I would still run into people yelling at me, spewing all kinds of racial slurs. And those were in places that I had already established as probably on the safer side. So I don't know. I just, even with what's been going on recently with the recent hate crime, part of me feels like if I was continuing with in-person learning, I just be so stressed all the time, thinking about like, what if I run into the wrong type of people today? What if I get on the wrong bus? And when I say wrong bus, I don't mean like take the wrong bus to school. I mean like get on the wrong bus with the wrong people, you know?
Mm-hmm. And it's sad that like this is the type of thing that we have to think about just going to school every day.
Mm-hmm.
Like it's really at that point. And for me, luckily, once like quarantine or the pandemic started, my parents were able to drive me to school. Like I had the privilege of getting driven to school because my parents just.
I'm glad to hear that.
Thank you. My parents just didn't think it was really safe for both, just like health-wise and otherwise, for me to just take the public transport. But like as Tiffany said, I know a lot of people who just get yelled at, get like pretty much just like get like assaulted on the trains and stuff like that. Like a friend of mine got spit on by some random guy and she reported it to the police, but nothing happened. I think like either they just don't have time to care about stuff like that, or like it's just been increasing to the point where they can't like do anything about that.
And the thing is, there's already the stress and the weariness around COVID in general, since everyone should be social distancing. And when you're worrying about that, plus what if this person that I'm trying to get 6 feet apart away from wants me to die?
Yeah.
It's a lot.
Yeah.
How about you, Lola? How has it been for you in Chicago?
I personally, I've been spending most of the time working from home. I barely go outside. At the same time, like my clients, when they're talking with me, like day to day, what happened with them, especially to like their parents or the older generations, because we do see an increasing like incidents of the violence against Asian elderly. And after the Atlanta tragedy, and my several of my like my friends started they're trying to organize a march in Chicago. And when they talk with the local police, just explaining why they're doing this, and the folks are just saying, like, there's one specific cop was saying, "Oh, I don't see any hate against Asians in our communities. Like, why do you feel like it's necessary to have something like that?"
Wow.
Yeah, and me personally, when I'm seeing a lot of folks were posting stuff on social media, Stop Asian Hate. I mean, it's really good to see that they actually see that being a problem. At the same time, I remember some of these specific people were posting Asians don't belong in POC community last summer. So it is really interesting to see how people are responding to the current event, just all over the spectrum.
Mm-hmm. Speaking of like social media, I actually, so two things happened. I was posting on my story because I felt very strongly about this, and someone in my school actually responded, and we ended up having a 1 hour conversation about why this person thought that this has nothing to do, like the recent attacks have nothing to do. Yes, the one in Atlanta specifically was not racially driven. And then I responded by saying, okay, maybe it wasn't racially driven. Maybe the murderer was just like specifically targeting brothel workers, and they just all happened to be Asian, which again, just saying that out loud doesn't make sense to me personally, but whatever, giving the person the benefit of the doubt. But this person just kept on going on to be like why do you care if Asian, like people in the Asian community get killed? Like why do you care about this stuff? And I was trying to explain to them, like, as Asians, as people of color, we need to stick together and like stand beside each other to support each other in this, because when things like this happen, like, I don't know, personally I feel a sense of community. Like, it's hard to explain to someone who just genuinely doesn't understand that, but this person just was saying, like, well, isn't that racist towards white people? Like, why are you excluding white people? And I was saying, well, people of color have been pretty much like the shared experience is that we've all been, like, screwed over by white people at some point in history. And this person just kept on nitpicking at my argument, kept on nitpicking when I was just asking for like a shred of just a little bit of empathy. Like, just let the community grieve. You don't need to go around commenting and replying to everybody's stories saying, actually, your facts don't add up. And it takes a 2-minute Google search to find out that, like, these attacks weren't racially driven. And it boggles my mind that there are people who will take time out of their day to just do stuff like this. It's really sad.
Mm-hmm. It is really sad. And whenever this happens, there are multiple incidents in our life when we were target of microaggression, and we were wondering, if this is actually microaggression, or am I just being overly sensitive? and we internalize a lot of that.
Mm-hmm. I actually, funny you bring that up. A friend of mine ended up texting me complete opposite of what this person was texting me. But my friend texted me saying, "Hey, like, due to the recent spike, I just wanted to check in with you, make sure that you're okay." And before she asked me that, I was thinking to myself, like, I was fine. But as I kept on thinking about it, I realized, like, oh my God, I'm not. Like, this has really been wearing on me. And the fact that she even asked, I was like, wow, like, I'm really grateful that she asked. But I was like, I realized I was not okay. Like, and I'm completely valid for feeling that way. Like, the fact that this person, the first person, was trying to invalidate everyone's like feelings and grieving, like, it's, you just need to remind yourself that it's okay to be feeling this way.
Yeah, absolutely. And the fear of experiencing racism, just the impact of microaggression and something like this, it's very real. Even if you're not experiencing direct incident, just the knowledge of it can cause them, just knowing that this could happen to you, to your community, to your family, to your friends, it could cause you a lot of anxiety, depression, and just hypervigilant. So that could be the source of other mental health issues. It's a collective trauma. Um, when people sharing this identity, having experience, when they have experienced violence, and you no longer feel safe in this environment that you live day to day, and that could be traumatic, and that could definitely impact your mental health.
To go off of what Rihanna said earlier, I've honestly, aside from mandatory things that I have to do on social media, for example, with Fresh Off the Broke, I've been pretty much avoiding looking at people's story just because a lot of people, their hearts are obviously in the right place, a lot of allies, but sometimes when they repost to their stories, they'll repost like live footage and videos, and especially if it's Instagram Reels, it plays before you open it, right? If it's a different type of post, you have to open it and then it starts playing. But with Reels, they just play automatically. So there's a lot of very triggering content out there, and it I would just say like a good rule of thumb is that if you're going to be posting something like that, to put a trigger warning saying like, oh, trigger warning, uh, physical assault, or like trigger warning, anti-Asian hate crime, or like hate crime. It doesn't necessarily have to pertain to an Asian hate crime, but people of insert community do not enjoy opening their phone and seeing people of their community just dying all the time. Like obviously it's the reality, but people don't like seeing what I recall some people referring it to as like, what was it called? It was like pain porn, or like trauma porn, something like that.
Yeah, I'm actually just looking into this study showing that during COVID, 1 in 4 parents and youth reported racial discrimination when they're facing every day. Like, this is a study conducted in the Chinese American communities. So that is a very high percentage. Basically, even if you're not experiencing that day to day, you're probably someone around you probably has experienced that. What I have noticed about this current event and the march and the social movement recently is I feel like this is actually like at the march past Saturday I attended in Chicago. I noticed that there are a lot of members. This is probably their very first march they've ever been to. Like, a lot of them are immigrants. and they, for some reason, they either don't feel safe voicing their political opinion because they could be legal consequences, or they feel like they're not American, this does not impact them. While I feel like this specific incident actually makes folks realize it doesn't matter where you're originally from, it doesn't matter your nationality, it doesn't matter your legal status, it's impacting you. When the perpetrator try to harm you because of your race, because how you look like, they don't really care about whether you have an accent or if you're a citizen or not. This is real. I mean, this could impact everyone in the community. So this is actually pretty, like for me, I think it's a really exciting thing to see, especially I think the Asian community for a long time has been pretty segregated.
Yes.
Definitely. This kind of connects to what Rihanna was talking about earlier with the schoolmate. I guess that's the right word for it. Yeah, schoolmate. She was a schoolmate because that person, they basically said to Rihanna, like, oh, isn't that kind of racist, or isn't that whatever, to have, I guess, a shred of empathy for other people in your community or just other people of color. A lot of the times, obviously not the trash white people, of course, they will say like, oh, but the recent anti-Asian hate crime, haven't you noticed that a lot of it has been committed by Black people? Oh, haven't you noticed that blah, 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 blah? Oh, why are you blaming it on white people when this race is actually more angry or like quote unquote worse to Asian people? And I think a very important thing to remember is that there's a lot of background behind that, because why is it that there's so much inner culture or just so much tension within the BIPOC community? It's because a lot of the time there are people that are upset with certain people not acknowledging the privilege they have, people using their privilege against other people. And it does stem back to white supremacy and white people, because the reason why insert race is mad at insert race is because they have more privilege than them. And a lot of the time that privilege is connected to the way that white people treat them, right? Because people say, oh, if Asian people face racism, then why are they the highest earners, which is actually not true. They say things like that. And the thing is, if to the people that are in these positions, like to the Asians that are in these like high earning positions, which do exist, that is connected to white people, because there is obviously the model minority myth, and all, which increases like the proximity that Asian people have to white people. But just the whole idea that people say, oh, Black people are worse to Asian people, or Asian people are worse to so and so. All of that is it's just basically white supremacy is putting all this tension between all these different communities, and it's fueling all this like pent up anger, and people end up projecting it onto like their quote unquote neighbors, if that makes sense, because everyone's just like, oh, well, you have this privilege that I don't, so I'm mad at you. But the thing is, what the overlying issue is really is white supremacy. Like I'm sorry if that offends you, person that was mad at Rihanna, but that's the truth.
Yeah.
Yeah, it is so true. And part of it, I feel like folks are victim blaming all the time, right? It's like people say women's biggest enemy is women. All right.
Yeah, women always get pit against each other. It's so important for people in marginalized communities to stand together, because the system's trying to push people apart, right? And it ends up turning into, like what I said, like tension between all these communities. But what needs to happen is people rising up together against the community. I'm not against the community, sorry. I just completely blew away everything. stand against the system. And that's, like solidarity is so important, right?
Mm-hmm. I guess like another big problem with mental health in the Asian community is that there's just a giant stigma around it, and everyone just wants to stay silent about it. Like there's never any talk about how we're actually feeling and how things are affecting us, you know?
Yeah, I mean, earlier you did say that before your friend texted you, you had convinced yourself that you were completely fine with,
Yes, I am guilty
throughout
of that.
throughout the recent hate crimes that have been happening.
Mm-hmm.
That's definitely part of the stigma and like the whole mental block that people put themselves in.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. What do you think that might be? I can give you some options, like we can all check which one we're contributed to the stigma. It could be, I must be successful, so I cannot show any sign of weakness. And the second one is it's a burden to share my emotions.
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm.
So it's like, in many Asian American households, children need to grow up controlling or hiding their emotions. So if you're being too emotional, you're being perceived as someone who complains too much or doesn't try to solve the problem.
We're both just like, oh, oh.
Yeah. Like checking off all the boxes.
Yep.
That's why I think it's so important to have a podcast like this. Folks actually realize it's not their problem. This is a shared experience.
Mm-hmm.
Really help them unlearn a lot of those stigma they internalize.
Right. Were those three or four check boxes the ones that you commonly encounter?
Yes, absolutely. And I check all the boxes.
We love being relatable,
Yeah.
Yep. It could also be I am ungrateful for all I have because my parents, they sacrificed so much and they have gone through a lot worse. So if I'm struggling mentally, it means that I'm not grateful for what they have done for us.
Yeah, that's also a really common one.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, especially I think for immigrant parents, a lot of them, they have given up a lot, might be like refugee or asylum seekers, or just gone through a lot more trauma than we have.
Mm-hmm. And since, especially if you're a child of an immigrant or if you're like a first generation immigrant, you've seen what your parents had gone through, or you saw the whole immigration process, and since they don't have the same opportunities as you do now or you did when you were born in insert other country, there very much is a burden to do better and provide your family with a better future because that's what they were striving for when they came, right? Or when they left. Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. That's adding to you must be successful.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
It's just really easy to compare yourself,
Like, yeah, especially since comparison is such a big thing in the Asian community as well.
Yeah, very much.
Look at your cousin.
Yeah.
Yeah, that comparison thing. It's you really internalize that because that's the only way you can evaluate yourself like when you were younger, how good you are. Like your value is based on comparatively with your relative or with your neighbor's child.
Mm-hmm.
Since you brought up comparison, I had a question for you, Lola. Since you know how in the aging community, going into medicine, going into law is such a big this is the way.
Mm-hmm.
So when you went into like this field, like therapy, did you face any sort of like disappointment or like retaliation from your family? Because of course therapy still is in like the health stream, but I was wondering, since mental health is a stigma, if that affected uh, your way of pursuing this, if that makes sense.
Yeah, absolutely. I think even I'm in this, this is my career. You know, when I talk with my family, a lot of them still don't believe in mental health. To this point, you know, my mom is pretty happy with where I am, doing something I really like to do and helping folks. At the same time, you know, when I talk with her about, hey, maybe you need to talk with a therapist, I think you're going through a lot. My mom is like, oh, like, can you just be my therapist? And I was,
Oh my.
and I was explain to her, you don't social work your family. That's not how it works. And then, you know, it comes to this guilt trip thing.
Yeah.
Yeah. Have you seen the meme about about therapists using what their therapist told them for their clients, and then it turns out that therapist used what their therapist told them on their clients?
Yeah, it's just a big loop.
Yeah, and I wonder who is this like therapist, like the boss therapist?
Yeah.
Right. Who's like the one all be all?
Yeah,
Who's their therapist?
Yeah.
I mean, it is. I think it is definitely hard from for, you know, especially when I explain to them what mental health is, they still don't believe in mental health. And a lot of my family, because I went to social work school, and that's even harder for them to understand, because for a lot of my family, they think social work is basically doing like volunteer work and not really seeing that being a profession. Right. The next one is, it's disrespectful to my spiritual beliefs. So basically, if you like, for some folks, you know, they might be taught to rely on prayers even when they're dealing with a challenging time. So if you're, you know, going through a hard time, like your loved one may encourage you to pray or, you know, read the Bible. And suicide is considered sinful. And basically, like, there probably wouldn't be a lot of people would suggest you to talk with a counselor or actually seek medication.
That one is also relatable. Yeah, there's always it's always like when something bad happens, it's like, oh, just pray and God will help you. And it's like, well, yes, maybe like that does help, but at the same time, like, can't I get a little more support rather than just being told to, you know, like, face my problems alone, basically? Like, well, at least that's what it feels like for me.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, and the other side of that, which I've heard many times, of people saying, like this pertains more to homophobia, but people saying like, oh, pray the gay away or pray the insert of this away. It's,
Yes.
I don't know. It sounds so, it like to an outsider, it sounds so ridiculous, right? Like, I guess I would be considered an outsider. It sounds so ridiculous to say these things, but if you were to actually analyze like the background and why people say this, it's like a lot darker than just this one statement, you know?
Like, even just like the whole idea of conversion camps, like, why was that a thing that people did? Like, it's just so sad that this is what they thought was the way to deal with this, like, these issues, you know?
And part of it, I feel like it's just laziness of parents' side. The next barrier is like parents, relatives. But sometimes, especially when you're under 18, you need parents' permission to go to therapy, seek for mental health service. So that could definitely be a barrier, and they will basically like, if you're going through something, why don't you talk with us first? We would like to help you. Why would you prefer to talk with complete strangers than sharing it to your family?
Mm-hmm. That's a big one.
Definitely. And the thing is, with the stigma within the Asian community and within families, they say, oh, why are you going to therapy, or oh, why are you going to see someone when you can talk to your family? But then if you were to confide in them, they say that's a problem. Is that, well, why are you feeling this way? This isn't right. What are you worried about? Why you're not depressed? You don't even know what that is.
Yeah. And then the funniest part about that is that it's always like they start complaining about their issues, and it's like, okay, what? Like, where this you told me to talk to you, and now you're talking to me about your issues? Like, make it
Maybe
make sense.
you have unresolved issues too.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, like every teenage client I have, or any client under 18, I feel like their parents need therapy. Like
Yeah.
every single one of them.
Oh man.
Oh gosh, that's very real, since with this stigma, no one wants to, or no one thinks that they should seek help, which leads to this whole like almost passing down of like mental illnesses or mental issues. And since many generations before they quote unquote turned out fine, then why aren't you fine, and why aren't you just dealing with it by not doing anything? And it's very much important for I'm going to say this generation, in vaguely, since it depends on like who's deciding to break the cycle, but it's just important for quote unquote this generation to break that cycle for, I would say, like the next generation of their family, right? Since like Lola said, when she talked to teenage clients, a lot of times it seems like their issues also stem from like unresolved issues that their parents had, that maybe their grandparents had, and it takes one person or one group to start to break the cycle.
Absolutely. And for within our community, a lot of folks describe when they're going through depression, anxiety, they're actually having a lot of somatic symptoms. They express negative emotions by describing physical pain, like headaches or like fatigue, stomachache, things like that. It's almost like if you're going through something internally, if you're suffering, that's not an issue. It's only a problem when you're actually feeling the physical pain.
For sure, a lot of the times, mental health and physical health, there's always people saying, "Oh, well, just because you don't feel great, that doesn't mean that you can't do this or you can't get up and go wherever." But just because you can't see the pain, or just because you can't see something, doesn't necessarily mean that nothing's going on.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's what I found as a practitioner, just, the education, basically like our training, becoming a therapist is limiting, because the way that we're diagnosing people is based on their day-to-day functioning. Basically, if you're functioning at a pretty high level, then you don't really qualify as many diagnoses. The reality is a lot of clients that I work with, they're pretty high functioning and also struggling with severe depression, anxiety. It doesn't mean that they're not suffering. They're just not causing trouble for other people.
I totally get where you're coming from. And a lot of the times, because of this perception that people have of quote unquote high functioning people, I mean, to say like, oh, this person's high functioning, so they're fine. That's also ableist, right? Because just because someone can go about doing insert task, that doesn't necessarily mean that they're not going through something. And also, what constitutes someone as high functioning, right? Like a lot of the time, the reason why people they continue to go about their day or they continue working or going through school, it's because that might be their coping mechanism, right? There's people, the way that they cope is by ignoring their issues, which yes is like bottling it up and also like an unhealthy way of doing it, but that is something that people do when they're going through something.
Yeah, absolutely. And the last one contribute to stigma is on therapists. A lot of folks, they have tried therapy before and did not find it helpful because a lot of the therapists, they're not trained in cultural competency. And if like some of my clients, they come to me and just, describing their experience in therapy, like their previous therapist, they're really good therapists. It's just some of the clients, they found that they are working for the therapist. So they're explaining everything going on in their life. Part of it is the culture stuff, educating the therapist, how it's considered a culture norm. So that could also be a barrier, because if you feel like you're working a lot harder than your therapist, you probably wouldn't be very motivated to continue treatment.
That plays a really big part. Like, I think a lot of people, like, for that reason, also just don't seek out therapy in general, because especially in the media, therapy is always seen as like a white older man, like sitting at a chair while the client is also a white person sitting there, and they talk about these things, and people of color generally are like, well, I don't really feel like they'll understand, like why would I seek help per se from someone who like won't even get it in the first place.
I know people that have talked about experiences like that, talk about past therapists that they've had that completely disregard the issue at hand. And of course, that doesn't represent all therapists, but it does show that there's a clear issue when you have someone that doesn't relate or isn't trained in that specific area. They're not they don't have like cultural sensitivity.
And I think that's all I have for factors contribute to stigma barriers.
Just now, we were talking about how when you don't have a therapist that is culturally sensitive or trained to understand your specific situation, that can lead to someone just wanting to give up on therapy as a whole. And, Lola, with your like Fig Tree Counselling, how you specifically, excuse me, you target people of color and people in the LGBTQ community. What has your experience been like so far? With this specific, how do you say? Just your experience with just like creating this space and how it's been like meeting people and getting your message out.
Yeah, absolutely. So for our like a Fig Tree, basically all therapists, they're either people of color or they're queer or they have some kind of marginalized identity. One thing we found in common for our client is they have the experience of not belonging or feeling like they don't belong. Just this, feeling othering, this experience. And we really want our therapists to be able to relate to that. Because if you have never feel like an outsider, it's really hard for you to understand what it feels like. And that is something we think is important at Fig Tree. So in therapy, what we offer comes from not just what we've learned, but also who we are, like our personal experience.
It's so important to make therapy accessible to these communities because, with the stigma that's already there, if you can't even find a space that is welcoming of you, then I can totally understand why so many people feel like hopeless in this journey to seeking professional help in therapy.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. And even for me, when I was looking for a therapist, I ideally, I am queer and I'm also Asian, and I really want to find someone who understands both part of my identity. Unfortunately, they don't intersect that often. Even for the spaces, a lot of queer spaces are predominantly white, or they prefer whiteness. Even if they don't really acknowledge that. And for my Asian friends, most of them were straight in a period of time. So when I was looking for a
Right.
therapist, it's just really hard to find a queer Asian therapist. So I can either find a queer white therapist or an Asian cis straight therapist. Yeah, so that has been a struggle.
So I know we've mentioned this multiple times throughout our discussion, but since there is, I mean, we always go back to stigma. And since there is this stigma, it stops people from pursuing these paths, which is probably why you had such a hard time finding a queer Asian therapist, and why the queer ones that you did find, they were white, because as everyone knows, uh, LGBT community, a lot of the time, like the white people, they are at the forefront of it. And when I say the forefront, not that they spearheaded this whole movement, it's more that because how do I say this? It's just because like white privilege, right? Obviously, them being in the LGBT community will put them in a like quote unquote marginalized community. However, since they're white, like their proximity, the privilege and just like white privilege in general is still much closer to people in the LGBT community that are also people of color. And so that's why I imagine you can only find queer white therapists. And then when you found Asian therapists, they were straight, since there's just so many barriers everywhere all the time.
Mm-hmm.
To
Yeah.
put it in simple terms, it's so frustrating.
Yeah, absolutely. And for mental health, sometimes I often reflect on just those approaches I usually use. When it comes to family system, a lot of time we talk about enmeshment. This family has no boundaries. But what would be considered normal, like a normal family? Like what would
Right.
be, yeah, like it's just like sometimes I hear folks saying, if you're queer, if your family don't accept it, then they don't love you. Then you should just cut them off. In reality, that's not always the case.
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm.
And also just for talk therapy itself, just when you have a problem, you have the space and then you talk about it and you process that. Um, that's also a very cultural specific thing. I mean, I work with some elderly Asian client. This woman in particular, I mean, she has gone through some trauma and she's grieving. What she did in therapy, she just doesn't want to talk about it. So we get to talk about other stuff in her life and encourage her to seek out support from her friends, from her family. And when she's actually spending time with those people, she also doesn't talk about the trauma or the grieving part. Just the fact that she's feeling that she's being supported and being in the community actually helped tremendously. So for this situation, even she's not directly in processing trauma, the way that we're taught to do with the client in therapy. She's still, experiencing a significantly improvement with her symptoms and everything. So that really helped me just reflecting on the training, what is considered to be appropriate.
Like sometimes you don't even need to acknowledge it. Like sometimes people just, they don't work that way. They can't come face to face with that, but just having a support, like loving people around them, that's enough for them to like heal themselves pretty much.
Yeah, totally. Just understanding that healing, there's no right way of healing. It's your journey.
Definitely. Support systems are so important, and then on like the other side of that, it's important for people to know that I'm not sure how exactly to put this, but you know how people say that when you're like sharing like traumatic experiences with people, you should make sure that they have the capacity for that, or like they're in the right like headspace for that.
Yeah, like you don't want to trauma dump on people pretty much.
Yeah.
Mhm.
And I would say, I'm trying to think of how I'm trying to put this. But basically what I'm trying to say is that one, support systems are so important. Two, I agree with what you were saying about how you don't necessarily have to say, oh, this happened and I'm not feeling great. Sometimes just having that like in a way like silent support, like you're sitting next to your friend and you're watching a movie, and that's support. And at the same time, like if you are in a situation where you're telling people, like opening up, you could also just like be wary that you're not trauma dumping on people. And also if you're on the receiving end of that, I guess if you aren't sure what to say, or you don't feel like you have the capacity to deal or respond to that, definitely don't do. I know it's kind of a meme, but definitely don't do the like, oof, okay. thing.
Yeah, like don't be like, LOL, oh, that's bad. Like that's not the correct way to respond to stuff like that.
Right. Yeah, I feel like the response is sometimes, when we're reaching out to folks and they're not responding in a real welcoming or validating way, maybe it's not because they don't care about you. Maybe they are just not very comfortable with their own feelings. It's hard work to be able to hold that space for anyone, like even for themselves.
Definitely.
Also, just like this generation, as much as I am seeing like people being more comfortable speaking up about their experiences, I'm also seeing a lot of people like turn them into jokes, or the way that they deliver stuff like this, it always has to end with a LOL. Like they don't want, it's almost as if they don't want to take it seriously because they're afraid that other people will, I don't know how to word this. But like, like when you see people, like they'll have a whole paragraph or like say something out loud and be like, but that's just my opinion, that's just me. And like it's always, you don't have to do that.
Right. Absolutely. It's your space. I agree with that. And I also believe that addressing mental health in Asian communities is just not a problem that can be solved overnight.
Yes.
At the same time, there are a lot of things that we can do, like, queer spaces and mental health spaces should be more inclusive of folks of color. And, in those spaces, we just need to tackle the root of race-based issues by listening to folks. But their individual experiences and validating those experiences.
Mhm.
Totally.
And I also want to express, you guys are doing such an important work because utilizing the
you.
powerhouse of media, that's just so important representation of Asian narratives, especially those dealing with mental health issues.
Thank you. It's always funny that the reason why we started this is because me and Tiffany like would just sit together in school and realize that, hey, we have the same, we feel the same way about certain things. We have the same issues, and it was like, why don't we just make a podcast? And it just makes us really happy that other people are also like feeling the same way that we felt with each other, you know?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I can imagine a young Asian, maybe queer child listening to your podcast and feeling empowered by the beauty of their identity.
And honestly, I'd like to say the same thing back to you. I mean, with the work that you and your team have done at Fig Tree Counselling, creating this space that's welcoming of people that are traditionally not welcomed in the mental health space. Like I'd like to, take a second to acknowledge the work that you've done. It's amazing.
Thank you. I appreciate that.
Like it's really important what you're doing. It's really important for just everyone to take the next step, especially within the Asian community. So yeah, I guess just talk about like the different resources that you recommend for like listeners right now.
Yeah, absolutely. So Fig Tree, we're putting together a resource guide. So we're still working on it, and we'll put it on our website. So that's figtreeshy.com. And I do have some recommendations in terms of, if you're looking for a therapist and you want to find a POC therapist near you, there is an option called Open Path Collective. So that is a platform that you'll be able to search for a therapist that accept a sliding scale. If you're looking for specifically an Asian therapist, you can get on this website called Asian Mental Health Collective. That is a catalog. You'll be able to see what therapist is practicing in your area. There's also, I feel like it's actually getting a lot better. At first everyone's looking for a therapist at Psychology Today, and folks are realizing Psychology Today is not the most inclusive platform. There was one time I was trying to look for a therapist for a friend, and I searched for a Black therapist, and the first 5 therapists are white. I don't even know how that happened.
Wow.
I think they're doing better. I hope that they're doing better with that. There's another platform called Inclusive Therapist, and Therapin Den. That's also a platform that you'll be able to find therapists based on their cultural identity. If you're looking for a queer therapist, there's a National Queer and Trans Therapists of Color Network. I will be including all these resources under the description box or whatever you guys are using.
Yes, these all will be in the.
Yes, of course.
Okay.
We just want to thank you for like being on the podcast today.
Yeah, thank you so much for taking the time out of your day to do this.
Yeah.
Thank you. You guys are doing really amazing work, and I'm so flattered that you include me in your work, because this is really cool.
Thank you. The pleasure is all ours.
Yeah.
Well, thanks for tuning in today. Honestly, I had a great time talking to Lola. I think we covered a lot of very important. Yes, Rihanna did too. No, it was just me. Only I enjoyed this. I dragged Rihanna along. Rihanna was upset the entire time. No, just kidding. Just for legal reasons, that was a joke. But yes, I had a great time talking to Lola. We covered a lot of really important, and even though these topics are common in the sense that a lot of people experience it, it's not something that people talk about ever. And it's just so important for us to have conversations like these, especially with now. I mean, with the recent anti-Asian hate crimes, it just seems like we're more divided than ever, right? And I know people say that a lot, but it's true. I mean, it just feels like everyone's against each other in every single way. It's so important for us to stand in solidarity, whether that means standing in solidarity with your fellow Asians or standing in solidarity with your fellow people of color. Just so important to be there for each other right now.
Also, a reminder, all of your feelings are valid right now.
Yeah.
I definitely needed that reminder.
Shout out to the person that texted Rihanna.
Yeah. I was going to make a joke
have an existential crisis, but it was a needed existential crisis.
Yes. Well.
And another thing, if you want to check out Lola and what Fig Tree Counselling does, we'll definitely have all the links in our description. Disclaimer 2.0. Fig Tree Counselling, they are only licensed in Illinois, and even though they're doing, like telecounseling, I believe that's what it's called, and like virtual work, even though they do offer that, due to like legal guidelines, if you are, a listener right now and you think that you would like to look into their services, unfortunately, you would have to be an in-state client, only for legal reasons. But I'm sure you can definitely find someone through the resources that Lola offered. A lot of them are almost directories for Asian counselors or just counselors of color in general.
Highly recommend.
Sorry?
Highly recommend.
10 out of 10.
11 out of 10.
Well, if you enjoyed this episode, be sure to leave a comment and let us know. Suggest any other topics you'd like us to cover. Maybe recommend a guest. If you got someone that works with first generation Asians, or just Asians in general, definitely in the comments. Maybe share your experiences with us if you'd like. And show Lola some love, please. Lola deserves all the love. Lola's great. Lola, if you're listening to this,
we love you.
In post, yes.
Thank you.
Thank you for everything that you do.
Yes. All of her links will be down in the bio. In the bio, not bio, description. I always say bio. Okay, anyways.
Everything's a bio.
Yes. Okay. If you want to find out more about us, check out the card link in our Instagram bio. It contains links to our streaming platforms such as Spotify, Anchor, Apple Podcasts, and more. That's probably why I always say bio, because Instagram bio. Okay, but follow us for more behind-the-scenes content, announcements, and other random things we decide to put on there.
Thank you so much, and see you next time.
Bye.